When a 94-year-old Hollywood legend is suddenly arrested in the middle of a courtroom, the world stops to watch. But this isn't a movie. It's real, and the stakes are higher than ever. What begins as a controversial trial over a bold documentary turns into a national battle over free speech, political power, and the very core of justice in America. In this gripping story, we'll uncover how Pam Bondi, the U.S. Attorney General, takes a stand that shocks the judge, rattles a biased courtroom, and changes the course of the trial. From whispered conspiracies to leaked emails and a secret investigation into a federal judge, this is more than a legal drama. It's a fight for truth itself. But before we dive into this story, I want to hear from you. Comment down below, where in the world are you watching from? Let's light up this comment section. And hey, if you love stories with high drama, power shifts, and the kind of moments that leave people speechless, you're in the right place. Tap that subscribe button right now. Hit the notification bell so you never miss when we drop the next chapter in these powerful, untold stories. It began like any other court proceeding, formal, methodical, quiet. But that illusion shattered in a matter of minutes inside Courtroom 4 of the Virginia State Courthouse, where history unfolded before stunned onlookers. Under the vaulted ceiling, drenched in solemnity and expectation, a moment transpired that would ripple across the nation. Clint Eastwood, the revered Hollywood legend, stood tall at the witness stand. Dressed in a sharp gray suit, shoulders squared, his weathered face was a portrait of resilience. At 94 years old, Eastwood wasn't just testifying, he was standing trial for a deeper principle. The courtroom buzzed with tension as the focus of the case, a controversial documentary he had written and directed, was dissected for its supposed political implications. The film in question had set off a firestorm, exposing how a major media conglomerate manipulated information, allegedly to mislead the public. It struck nerves in high places. In response, the conglomerate sued Eastwood for defamation and demanded he surrender all production materials, including source interviews and research. Eastwood refused. "My film reflects the truth. What more does the court need?" he said, his voice low and gravelly echoing through the hushed courtroom. The audience, journalists, legal observers, and devoted fans alike held their breath. Judge Douglas Whitaker, known for his rigid approach to justice and rumored political ties, responded with swift and chilling finality. "Mr. Eastwood, the court finds you in contempt for deliberate noncompliance. Arrest him immediately." Gasps swept the room. The sound of handcuffs clicking onto Eastwood's wrists hit like a gunshot. Cameras flashed, reporters scribbled furiously, fans and spectators stared in disbelief. A cinematic icon, an embodiment of rugged integrity, was being led away like a common criminal. But the scene was far from over. As officers prepared to escort Eastwood out, a voice rang out from the gallery, calm, clear, authoritative. "Your Honor, the Department of Justice formally objects." The courtroom froze. Every head turned to see Pam Bondi, the sitting U.S. Attorney General, standing tall in a sleek black suit. Her presence immediately shifted the gravity of the room. Holding up a stack of federal documents, Bondi stepped forward. "This lawsuit is not only flawed, it's unconstitutional. It violates Mr. Eastwood's First Amendment rights. It is a calculated attempt to silence dissent and censor truth through the misuse of judicial power." The silence was deafening. Judge Whitaker paused, visibly rattled for the first time. His eyes flicked down to the motion Bondi handed over. Across the gallery, the tension cracked into murmurs, then quiet applause from a few brave spectators. Eastwood, though still cuffed, gave a faint nod of acknowledgement to Bondi, his expression hard, but grateful. This wasn't just a trial anymore. It was the opening act of a larger battle. One that would pit the machinery of justice against hidden power, expose institutional bias, and test the limits of free expression in modern America. And with Pam Bondi now in the fight, Clint Eastwood wasn't alone. As word of Clint Eastwood's arrest spread beyond the courthouse walls, the outside world erupted. Under the sweltering Virginia sun, a growing crowd of supporters had gathered, many holding banners emblazoned with Eastwood's iconic image from High Plains Drifter and Gran Torino. For them, he wasn't just a film icon, he was a symbol of integrity and defiance. The handcuffing of such a revered figure sent shockwaves through the public and media alike. Inside the courthouse, the tension only escalated. The root of this explosive trial wasn't violence or financial fraud, it was a documentary. Quietly produced and fiercely independent, the film, directed and funded by Eastwood, had peeled back the layers of a powerful media conglomerate accused of manipulating narratives, suppressing dissent, and shaping public opinion through backdoor deals and hidden censorship. Through interviews with whistleblowers and leaked internal documents, the documentary painted a damning picture of how information in America could be carefully managed, edited, and weaponized. Even before its full release, the trailer alone sent shockwaves through media and political circles. The conglomerate at the center of the story quickly responded, filing a massive lawsuit. Their claim? That Eastwood's film was misleading, defamatory, and designed to incite distrust in public institutions. They demanded full access to his production materials, accusing him of using stolen proprietary data. But Eastwood wasn't backing down. If they want the truth, they can see it in theaters, not in court files, he told his team defiantly. That refusal to comply, and his unwillingness to betray his sources, set the courtroom stage for the shocking arrest. Judge Douglas Whitaker, the man behind the contempt ruling, was no impartial figure. Whispers in legal circles suggested a long-standing grudge against Eastwood, dating back to a previous film where the villain bore a striking resemblance to one of Whitaker's close political allies. Though never confirmed, those rumors haunted the trial, raising questions about the judge's neutrality from the very start. From his bench, Whitaker's icy stare toward Eastwood made his animosity thinly veiled. For many, it was clear. This trial was personal. Outside, the story ignited the media. Some networks framed Eastwood as a reckless conservative provocateur, while others lauded him as a defender of civil liberties and artistic truth. On social media, hashtags like Free Eastwood and Truth on Trial began trending as fans and legal analysts alike debated the meaning of it all. Among the crowd, Scott Eastwood, Clint's son, stood before cameras with quiet resolve. "My father has always stood for truth. He doesn't bend to power. They won't silence him. Not now, not ever." Meanwhile, inside the Department of Justice headquarters in Washington, D.C., the real counteroffensive was taking shape. Under harsh fluorescent lights, in a secure, closed-door meeting, Pam Bondi gathered her team. On the long oak table before her sat towers of paperwork, legal filings, subpoenaed emails, media transcripts, and financial records. This wasn't just a case about one man or one film. This was an attempt to suppress a voice through legal intimidation, and Bondi had seen it before. Flanking her were two of her most trusted aides. Daniel Reeves, a silver-haired veteran of federal litigation, and Lena Marquez, a sharp and intuitive legal strategist who had risen quickly through the DOJ ranks. The three formed a triangle of strategic firepower, and their mission was now crystal clear. Expose the true intent behind this lawsuit and defend Eastwood as a proxy for every American's right to speak freely. Bondi scanned the materials with a frown. Whitaker is playing a dangerous game. Arresting Eastwood isn't about justice. It's about politics. Reeves, flipping through his own file, nodded grimly. There's chatter that the conglomerate contacted Whitaker's office before the trial even began. If we can tie those threads together, we may be staring at a direct conflict of interest. Marquez, eyes locked on her tablet, interjected. I found an internal document from the conglomerate. It outlines a strategy to discredit Eastwood and block the film's release before it even hit theaters. Bondi leaned forward. The gravity in the room thickened. Years of experience, both as Florida's Attorney General and now as head of the DOJ, had sharpened her instincts. This wasn't just a civil suit gone awry. It was a calculated power move, and if left unchecked, it would send a chilling message to journalists, artists, and citizens everywhere. Speak up and face the consequences. Bondi made her decision then and there. Contact Eastwood's producer, Mia. She can verify the financial records, and get Ryan Holt, the investigative journalist who compiled the film's raw data. We need to lock down credibility on all fronts. Reeves nodded. Marquez was already dialing. Bondi stood and walked toward the window, looking out across the night-blanketed Capitol. They think they can use the law to silence Clint Eastwood, but we're going to use the law to expose them. The Department of Justice offices in Washington, D.C., usually humming with procedural order, now crackled with intensity. Inside a glass-walled conference room lit by sterile fluorescent light, Pam Bondi was at the center of the storm, surrounded by binders, tablets, and the relentless tapping of keyboards. Time was not a luxury, it was a weapon, and Bondi was preparing to wield it. As the U.S. Attorney General, Bondi had faced powerful corporations and slippery politicians before, but this case felt different. This wasn't just about Clint Eastwood. It was about the system. A test of whether truth could survive the courtroom and whether the Constitution still shielded the lone voice brave enough to speak against institutional giants. Her team had stayed overnight. Coffee cups littered the table like empty bullet shells after a firefight. Daniel Reeves, the seasoned federal litigator, scanned case files with surgical precision. Lena Marquez, the DOJ's rising star in constitutional law, worked two devices at once, cross-referencing communications, tracing money trails, and building timelines with an almost unnatural speed. Bondi paced as she spoke. Whitaker crossed the line when he allowed Eastwood to be arrested. We can't let that stand, not just for Clint, but for every citizen who dares to speak the truth. Reeves looked up. We've started digging into Whitaker's rulings. There's a pattern. He's consistently sided with entities tied to the same conglomerate. Marquez chimed in. And we've got financial reports suggesting direct outreach between Whitaker's staff and the conglomerate's legal team days before the lawsuit was filed. It's not enough to prove corruption yet, but it's a start. Bondi's mind moved faster than she spoke. She needed to protect Eastwood, undermine the prosecution, and set up a formal inquiry into the judge himself, all without tipping her hand too early. That meant building a fortress of legal defense while quietly arming the offensive. We need two things by dawn, she said firmly. 1. Confirmation that Eastwood's film was produced independently, no advocacy group funding, no outside political money. And 2. A preliminary report on Whitaker's bias, something we can drop when the time is right. Marquez nodded and got to work. Reeves pulled out a flash drive. These are Eastwood's personal financial disclosures. All signs point to self-funding and private investors, nothing even remotely shady. Mia, the producer, kept meticulous records. Bondi exhaled, one front secured. Now it was time to prepare for what would come next in court. As the morning sun slanted through the tall, arched windows of Courtroom 4, the room was already packed. Tension simmered under the polished wood and gold trim of the federal courtroom. The audience, from die-hard Eastwood fans to stone-faced legal analysts, sat motionless, bracing for another day of verbal warfare. Judge Douglas Whitaker, now noticeably more severe, entered with his robes billowing behind him like a black flag. He called the court to order and nodded toward the prosecution. Eric Samuels, the lead prosecutor, rose with practiced confidence. Dressed in a crisp navy suit and exuding polished charisma, he addressed the court like an actor on stage. Every word sharpened, every gesture calculated. Your Honor, this case is not about silencing a man. It is about protecting the public from a reckless, politically motivated film that endangers truth itself. He held up a stack of documents emblazoned with the conglomerate's logo. We will prove that this film presents exaggerated, misleading, and factually incorrect claims. Not only that, but we suspect it was funded by political groups seeking to divide the American public. A murmur swept through the courtroom. Samuels called his first witness, Dr. Margaret Voss, a respected media analysis expert. Her presence lent the case academic credibility. She walked to the stand, her every step measured, her demeanor clinical. Samuels asked, Dr. Voss, based on your review of Eastwood's film, do the claims match up with verifiable public data? She replied, flatly, no. The film exaggerates the conglomerate's influence. It presents distorted statistics that could easily mislead viewers. The courtroom stirred. A few Eastwood supporters shifted uncomfortably. Others shook their heads. In the press row, Leah Carter, the young journalist tracking the case, scribbled in her notebook with growing skepticism. Something about Voss's testimony felt too polished, too rehearsed. Samuels pushed further. And do you see signs of political messaging in the film's structure or tone? Voss hesitated for effect. While there's no smoking gun, the narrative clearly aligns with anti-corporate, populist messaging, often associated with political advocacy groups. Samuels smiled, satisfied. The seeds of doubt had been sown. Judge Whitaker leaned forward. Mr. Eastwood, the court requires a clear statement on the data used in your film. Vague responses will not be accepted. Eastwood leaned into the microphone. His voice, even in restraint, carried thunder. The truth didn't come from institutions. It came from people brave enough to speak out. The numbers? The facts? They came from them, not sanitized reports. Applause cracked like lightning, but Whitaker slammed his gavel down. "Mr. Eastwood, you are warned. The court will not tolerate defiance." Samuels was ready. He called his second witness, Paul Kendrick, a former insider at the media conglomerate. Kendrick took the stand, his posture uneasy, voice trembling as he accused Eastwood's team of using stolen internal data. "They didn't get that info legally," Kendrick said. "I think someone hacked into our systems." The courtroom exploded. Gasps, shouts. One man yelled "liar," but was quickly silenced by security. Whitaker's voice boomed. "Order in the court." The weight of the moment fell hard. A criminal accusation had just been made on record. Eastwood, unmoved, sat silently, but even his steel resolve was being tested. But in the gallery, Pam Bondi didn't flinch. She leaned over to Reeves and whispered, "He just made a mistake. If Kendrick is lying, we can bury them with this. Get Holt and Mia ready. Marquez will dismantle this." Bondi knew the prosecution had played its hand. Now the defense and the Department of Justice had their moment to strike. As the prosecution stepped back, confidence radiating from Eric Samuels' smug expression, the courtroom simmered with tension. The audience shifted in their seats, whispers rippling like waves across a lake. Clint Eastwood, stoic and composed, sat silently at the defendant's table. He looked less like a man on trial, and more like a weather general watching an approaching storm. Calm, prepared, unafraid. Judge Douglas Whitaker, cloaked in judicial black, tried to maintain an air of impartiality, but the glint in his eye betrayed a hunger for control. His voice, smooth yet sharp, rang out across the courtroom. "Mr. Eastwood, the court demands you clarify the origin of the data used in your film. This body will not tolerate vagueness or deflection." The question sounded procedural, but everyone in the room felt the trap hiding behind the polished tone. It was meant to back Eastwood into a corner, to either violate confidentiality or be held in further contempt. Eastwood leaned slightly toward the microphone, his voice gravelly and deliberate. "I made this film based on truth. Real people, real stories. The numbers came from those brave enough to speak when others stayed silent. I don't answer to corporate spreadsheets. I answer to what's real." A few audience members clapped quietly despite the gravity of the moment. Whitaker immediately slammed his gavel down. "Mr. Eastwood, emotional rhetoric will not be tolerated. This court needs specificity, or there will be consequences." The judge's warning hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Everyone knew, one wrong move, and Eastwood could be facing obstruction charges. Samuels, now seizing the moment, smirked and called his second witness, Paul Kendrick, a visibly uncomfortable former executive from the media conglomerate at the center of the film. Kendrick's eyes darted nervously as he took the stand, avoiding Eastwood's unwavering gaze. "The data in the film was taken from internal files that weren't legally obtained," Kendrick said, his voice unsteady. "It's not just misleading, it's theft." The accusation hit the room like a thunderclap. Gasps, pens frozen mid-sentence. A woman in the back whispered, "They're trying to paint him as a criminal." Whitaker narrowed his eyes and nodded slightly, validating Kendrick's statement without words. One man in the gallery, a lifelong Eastwood fan, couldn't hold it in. "Liar," he shouted before being promptly escorted out by security. The courtroom devolved into chaos for a moment, and once again, Whitaker pounded his gavel furiously. "This is a court of law, not a theater. Order will be maintained." Eastwood remained silent, his jaw clenched, as if absorbing the blows without ever flinching. His legacy, his life's work, was now teetering under accusations of criminal behavior. The media outside would soon run headlines. Eastwood film linked to stolen data, and director faces legal meltdown. But Eastwood wasn't alone. In the spectator gallery, Pam Bondi watched closely, her expression unreadable. She leaned toward Daniel Reeves, her senior litigation advisor, and whispered with absolute resolve, "Samuels just overplayed his hand. It's time." Reeves nodded and discreetly messaged Lena Marquez, the DOJ's rising star. In less than 2 minutes, Marquez stood, straightened her suit, and stepped confidently to the courtroom floor. Judge Whitaker, without enthusiasm, gestured toward her. "The court recognizes the Department of Justice. Marquez's tone was calm, crisp, and razor-sharp. Your Honor, the Department of Justice moves to rebut the prosecution's claims by presenting evidence of the film's transparency and legal compliance. Our first witness is Mia Delgado, the film's producer. Mia approached the witness stand with confidence, holding her head high. She took the oath and locked eyes with the jury. Miss Delgado, Marquez began, did the production of this film follow all transparency and ethical standards? Absolutely, Mia replied. We were rigorous. Every dollar was tracked. Mr. Eastwood funded the film personally, along with a small group of private investors. No political advocacy groups, no hidden donors. Marquez handed a thick folder to the court clerk. These are the full financial records, verified by our office. Your Honor, we request they be entered into the record. Whitaker's jaw tightened. So entered, he said begrudgingly. Samuels rose to object. Your Honor, transparent financing doesn't prove the content of the film is accurate. But Marquez was prepared. Let's clarify that next, she said, without missing a beat. The Department of Justice calls Ryan Holt, investigative journalist and data analyst. A tall, lean man in his early 40s with a piercing gaze, Holt took the stand like a man who had nothing to hide. He swore his oath, then fixed his eyes on Samuels. Mr. Holt, Marquez asked, where did the data from Mr. Eastwood's film come from? From public records, whistleblower reports, legally obtained documents, and interviews with credible sources. I cross-verified every number with at least 3 independent sources. Were any political groups involved in your research? None. I worked alone. Mr. Eastwood never pressured me or interfered. The courtroom murmured again. The tide was turning. Marquez held up another stack of papers. These are the original research documents, collected months before the lawsuit. They prove the conglomerate's influence over information exceeds what their own public disclosures admit. Would you say your data contradicts the official narrative? Without question. Samuels stood to cross-examine, but his words stumbled. Mr. Holt, how do we know your sources weren't biased? Because I published them. Anyone can verify them. The truth doesn't hide behind corporate lawyers. Laughter rippled through the gallery. Samuels, clearly flustered, sat down abruptly. But Marquez wasn't done. Your Honor, we'd like to introduce a new exhibit, internal emails from the suing conglomerate, obtained through a federal subpoena in coordination with DOJ's internal investigation. She read aloud from one of the emails. If Eastwood's film releases, we neutralize him. Reputation first. Push our legal team to make it personal. The room gasped. Even Whitaker blinked, momentarily shaken. This, Marquez said calmly, is not just a lawsuit, it's a coordinated effort to silence an independent filmmaker, and it's unlawful. Bondi, still seated in the gallery, allowed herself a small, satisfied nod. Her plan was unfolding perfectly. The audience, once unsure of Eastwood's fate, now felt the courtroom shifting. The hunter had become the hunted, and with each piece of evidence, the Department of Justice was peeling back the layers of corruption. And this was only the beginning. The courtroom air had shifted. What once felt like a prosecution's fortress now trembled under the weight of truth. Lena Marquez, standing tall before the judge and jury, had done more than raise doubts. She had opened the floodgates. The evidence laid bare that this wasn't just a lawsuit. It was a coordinated attempt to silence a voice too powerful to ignore. Judge Whitaker tried to maintain his composure, but something in his face had changed. His commands rang out with less authority. His gaze, once sharp and cutting, now flickered with unease. He looked not like a judge presiding over a courtroom, but a man slowly realizing he had walked into his own reckoning. Marquez didn't slow down. With the momentum behind her, she introduced a new set of documents. Internal emails from the conglomerate that had filed the suit against Eastwood. Their contents were unmistakably damning. Communications between executives and legal advisors revealed a calculated strategy to neutralize Eastwood before his film could ever reach the public. One message read aloud echoed throughout the courtroom. If Eastwood's film releases, neutralize him. Reputation first. Pressure the court. Make an example out of him. Gasps followed. Even reporters paused mid-sentence. The room that had watched Clint Eastwood get handcuffed days earlier now sat in stunned silence, confronted with the reality of what was unfolding. Judge Whitaker cleared his throat, his voice quieter than before. He ordered the documents submitted into evidence, but his confidence was faltering. It was clear these developments weren't part of the script he had expected to follow. Samuels, seated stiffly at the prosecution table, tried to compose himself. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for a folder that now seemed meaningless. The defense's case had gone from defensive to offensive, and it was relentless. Marquez requested the court recognize one final witness, Dr. Emily Hart, a constitutional law scholar known for her impartiality and integrity. She entered the room with quiet authority, wearing a modest gray suit and the kind of poise that silences a room before a word is spoken. When asked whether Eastwood's film violated any laws by raising controversial political concerns, Dr. Hart responded without hesitation. No, the First Amendment exists for precisely this reason, to protect voices that challenge power, not just those that echo it. This film, while uncomfortable for some, is not unlawful. It is constitutionally protected expression. Her testimony didn't just validate the defense, it dismantled the last remaining argument of the prosecution. Even those skeptical of Eastwood could not argue with the clarity of the Constitution. Marquez offered no theatrical close. She didn't need to. The room had absorbed the facts, the patterns, the motive, and the principle. Everyone present could see what was happening. What started as a defamation case had become a constitutional crossroads. In the gallery, Pam Bondi remained silent, watching every gesture from the bench with a strategist's eye. Her instructions to the Office of the Inspector General were already in motion, and the preliminary results had arrived earlier that morning. The report identified multiple instances in Judge Whitaker's recent rulings where patterns of preferential treatment toward certain corporate plaintiffs could not be ignored. Not definitive proof of corruption, but more than enough to raise the alarm. And so, while the courtroom drama unfolded in plain sight, a second, quieter battle was being waged behind the scenes. A formal investigation into Whitaker's conduct had begun. Bondi had no interest in public declarations or media accolades. She understood the stakes were larger than this case, this judge, or even Clint Eastwood himself. She leaned over to Daniel Reeves and whispered, "The court's not the only place justice happens. We finish it here, but we hold him accountable where it matters most." He nodded, already preparing the submission to the Federal Judicial Oversight Committee. Back in the courtroom, Whitaker's voice broke through once more, steady, but lacking the conviction it once carried. "The court will take the new evidence under review and reconvene after recess." But everyone knew what that meant. A wall had cracked, and behind it, the truth was spilling out faster than anyone could contain. When court reconvened, the atmosphere had shifted from tense to volatile. The once confident prosecution now clung to the remnants of its case, desperate to reclaim credibility. Eric Samuels rose, his suit slightly disheveled, his once flawless composure dulled. The morning's revelations had clearly shaken him. Still, he pressed forward, unwilling to surrender the fight. He cleared his throat, projecting a calm he no longer truly possessed. "Your Honor," he began, voice tighter than before. "Despite the defense's claims of transparency and legality, we believe it is imperative for this court to see the full scope of funding behind Mr. Eastwood's film." He held up a fresh stack of papers, new subpoenas, financial requests, charts marked with red ink. "We ask that Mr. Eastwood submit a detailed list of donors. We have reason to believe that several of these so-called private investors may be acting on behalf of politically motivated advocacy groups." The request echoed through the courtroom like a second shot fired. Whispers broke out instantly. Even after the defense had revealed full funding records and established legal compliance, the prosecution was doubling down, now suggesting shadow funding without presenting any new evidence. Samuels knew he had little left. But he still had Whitaker. And that was something. The judge leaned forward, his fingers interlaced in front of his mouth. His expression had hardened again. "Mr. Eastwood," he said slowly, "the court finds merit in this request. You are instructed to provide complete donor disclosures to this court by end of day." There was no legal precedent for the demand, not under the current evidence. But Whitaker wasn't concerned with optics anymore. His tone was not of neutrality. It was of a man pushing the boundaries of judicial discretion, perhaps out of desperation. The room stiffened. Clint Eastwood shifted slightly in his seat, his shoulders still squared, but the tension was unmistakable. He leaned toward the microphone, his voice as steady as ever. "I've said this before. I'll say it again. This film was made with my money and the support of people who believed in it, not corporations, not political machines, people who trusted me to tell the truth." The words rang with conviction, but the room had grown weary of principle. They needed something more now, something tangible. Lena Marquez stood before Whitaker could respond, her eyes like steel. "Your Honor, with respect, this court is venturing beyond the boundaries of its authority. The Department of Justice objects. There has been no credible evidence submitted that would justify a secondary review of this film's funding. The records we submitted are complete and verified." Whitaker didn't even blink. Objection overruled. The statement was met with a quiet but palpable wave of disbelief. Even those in the gallery unfamiliar with court procedure could feel it. This was no longer a fair fight. In the press row, Leah Carter paused her note-taking. She'd written hundreds of pages on this trial, but now her focus shifted. Her instincts, once centered on Eastwood, now zeroed in on Whitaker. She saw what others were only beginning to suspect. The judge wasn't just leaning toward the prosecution, he was dragging the case in that direction. Samuels seized the opportunity. He called Mia Delgado back to the stand. "Mia," he began, with a tone more confrontational now, "you previously stated that no organizations influenced the film's production. Are you absolutely certain no donor, even indirectly, had ties to advocacy groups?" She didn't hesitate. "I am. Every contribution came with full disclosure and oversight. No interference. Not once." Samuels pushed harder. "Then how do you explain the film's direct targeting of a specific conglomerate? That seems politically charged by nature, doesn't it?" Marquez stood immediately. "Objection. Leading the witness. The prosecution is not asking for facts, he's inserting his own narrative." Whitaker's voice was sharp, too quick. "Objection overruled. The witness will answer." A beat of silence. Then Mia answered calmly. "We didn't target anyone, the story led us to them. If the truth is political, maybe it's because someone made it that way, not us." There were murmurs, nods from the gallery. Whitaker looked annoyed. Pam Bondi, seated behind Marquez, whispered to Daniel Reeves, "He's starting to lose control of the room, and now everyone sees it." Reeves responded quietly. The Inspector General's office flagged 3 recent cases. Whitaker showed consistent bias in all of them. Same pattern, same outcome. Marquez glanced down at her tablet, where another report from DOJ investigators had just arrived. "I'm combing through the conglomerate's transactions. If we can find even one donation that connects to Whitaker, we'll have what we need." Bondi nodded. "We're not just defending Eastwood anymore. We're dismantling the network that came after him." Outside the courtroom, news outlets began to shift their coverage. Cameras once focused on Eastwood's guilt now hovered over questions about Whitaker's impartiality. Analysts debated legal ethics and potential misuse of judicial discretion. The phrase conflict of interest began to surface on nightly broadcasts. Back in court, Whitaker attempted to reassert authority, his voice firm, but his eyes betraying the internal tension. "This court will proceed with a full evidentiary review of the defense's financial disclosures." No one responded aloud, but the unspoken message in the room was clear. The judge wasn't fighting for justice anymore. He was fighting to survive. Bondi leaned back in her seat, crossing her arms. "The higher he pushes," she said quietly, "the harder he's going to fall." And the drop was getting closer with every passing hour. Morning light filled the Virginia courthouse as Judge Whitaker took his seat, visibly rattled. After days of mounting pressure, testimony, and damning evidence, the air in the courtroom was tense and expectant. Clint Eastwood sat calm and resolute, Pam Bondi watching from the gallery, her work nearly complete. Whitaker's voice was subdued. "The prosecution has failed to provide compelling evidence. Therefore, all charges against Mr. Eastwood are dismissed." A wave of quiet applause broke out. Eastwood stood, offering a slight nod. The moment felt like justice, not just for him, but for free expression itself. Outside the courtroom, headlines were already shifting. But behind the scenes, Bondi's deeper strategy had landed. A federal investigation into Judge Whitaker had revealed patterns of bias and improper conduct. Days later, he quietly announced early retirement, his legacy damaged beyond repair. Eastwood and Bondi met briefly. No speeches, just a handshake. "You gave us something worth defending," she said. "And you made sure it was," he replied. Justice had prevailed, not with spectacle, but with resolve. A week after the trial, the spotlight began to shift. Not from Clint Eastwood, but toward the ripple effects his case had left behind. The courtroom was no longer filled with tense arguments and legal jargon. The seats were empty, the cameras gone. Yet what had occurred there was still echoing, on news broadcasts, in editorials, and most importantly, in the hearts of the people who had watched a legend refuse to bow. Out in a wide, sun-drenched Nevada field, Eastwood stood silently on the set of his now-completed documentary. The dust swirled at his feet, and the sky stretched endlessly above him. At 94, his silhouette still held the weight of stories untold. Around him, the film crew packed up gear, the shoot now finished, the project no longer a controversy, but a triumph. He stared toward the horizon, not as a director surveying a scene, but as a man reflecting on a lifetime of standing his ground. His film, once the center of a courtroom storm, had now opened in theaters across the country. People packed in to see it, not for scandal, but for truth. What was once labeled controversial was now being called courageous. The film had become a conversation starter, a cultural pulse check on freedom of expression, misinformation, and who really controls the narrative. In Washington, Pam Bondi quietly continued her work. She refused press requests and offers for interviews. Her victory in the Eastwood case wasn't about visibility, it was about accountability. She'd done her job. The rest could speak for itself. Bondi reviewed new DOJ policy proposals aimed at protecting whistleblowers, journalists, and independent creators from strategic lawsuits meant to silence them. Eastwood's case had sparked change, not just legal, but cultural. The message was clear: truth, when properly defended, endures. Social media exploded with photos of Eastwood standing in that Nevada field, tall, dust-covered, unshaken. The hashtag Eastwood Forever trended worldwide. But he never commented. He didn't need to. At the film's final shoot, Scott Eastwood stood beside his father, watching him with quiet pride. "You turned this fight into a story people won't forget," Scott said. Eastwood smiled, the lines on his face deepening. "The legend isn't me," he replied. "It's what happens when people stop being afraid of telling the truth." And with that, he turned back toward the camera. A final shot framed his weathered profile against the fading light, a symbol of endurance, not just in film, but in principle. This wasn't just a story about Clint Eastwood. It was a story about courage, about standing firm when institutions try to bend you. It's about the power of using your voice, even when powerful forces want to silence it. In a world where truth is often blurred by influence, this reminds us that integrity, strategy, and resilience still matter. Whether you're a filmmaker, a journalist, or just someone trying to speak up, let Eastwood's fight be your reminder. The truth may be challenged, but it can never be erased. If this story moved you, inspired you, or simply made you think, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. There are more stories like this to tell, and together, we'll keep bringing them into the light. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.